Losing VHS job became more than just a professional setback for him. It triggered a deep personal frustration that quickly turned into tension at home. When he returned that day, he offered no explanation, no discussion. Instead, he lashed out at HA's wife physically and harshly blamed her for becoming too confident. Repeating words influenced by HA's mother. The woman, though shocked, responded with silence and a faint, bitter smile, already recognizing the pattern of interference from her mother-in-law. What seemed like a quiet evening was only the beginning of a much larger storm. Within just 20 minutes, the scene shifted to another location, HA's mother's apartment, where the next confrontation was about to unfold. Earlier that day, Yelena had already heard unsettling news indirectly from a neighbor. Standing near the entrance of their building, the neighbor mentioned there had been job cuts at the factory. She hinted that Yelena's husband, Roman, might have been affected. Yelena dismissed the concern at first, assuming he would have told her himself, but as the day passed in silence, her concern grew. Roman made no calls, sent no messages. When she returned home, she found him in the kitchen, withdrawn and tense, with a half-finished drink in front of him. After a long silence, he finally admitted the truth. He had been laid off and would be unemployed starting the next day. Yelena responded calmly, trying to reassure him. She reminded him of HA's experience and education, telling him they would manage together for now. But instead of comfort, her words seemed to ignite HA's pride. He took her support as disrespect. The conversation quickly turned tense, exposing deep issues in their relationship. HA's sensitivity about financial status and the growing influence of HA's mother's beliefs about gender roles and authority in marriage. Roman's mother, Lydia Nikolaevna, had always held strong traditional views. In her perspective, a man should always be the provider, while a man's role was to maintain the home. Over time, these beliefs had deeply shaped Roman's attitude. That evening, after an argument, he left the room abruptly, leaving Yelena alone with a heavy sense of unease. Later, Lydia Nikolaevna reached out, demanding they visit her the next day to discuss the situation. Yelena understood this was not just concern. It was controlled. The following evening, they went to her apartment. Lydia greeted her son warmly but inspected Yelena with a critical gaze. The table was already set, and the conversation quickly shifted toward Roman's job loss. HA's mother spoke at length about unfairly hours and difficult times, but soon her tone changed. She emphasized that sacrifices would now be necessary and subtly praised Yelena's encouragement as a temporary solution. 10 came the pointed remarks warnings directed at Yelena not to become proud just because she was currently earning. According to Lydia, a husband's authority should remain intact regardless of employment status. Yelena responded calmly, refusing to engage in conflict, but it was clear the atmosphere was uncomfortable. Roman remained silent throughout, avoiding eye contact, offering no defense or support. By the end of the evening, Yelena realized something important. HA's silence spoke louder than any argument. Over the following weeks, the situation at home gradually worsened. Roman appeared to be searching for jobs, but without urgency or consistency. Most of HA's days were spent online, disconnected from responsibility. However, all tasks were neglected, and tension quietly built up in the background. When Yelena gently suggested he help more at home during this period, HA's reaction made it clear he was unwilling to accept any shift in roles. What had begun as a temporary setback was slowly turning into a deeper breakdown in their relationship, shaped by pride, influence, and unresolved expectations. Tension in the household continued to grow day by day. What began as stress over unemployment slowly turned into constant arguments and emotional distress between the couple. One evening, a simple disagreement about housework escalated again. Roman, already irritated and overwhelmed, snapped when Yelena asked him to help. He rejected the idea outright, insisting that he was under pressure and should not be expected to do chores. HA's response carried frustration and pride, making it clear that he saw household responsibilities as unfairly placed on him. Yelena, however, was also exhausted. Between her job and managing the home, she felt she was carrying everything alone. Still, she stayed quiet, sensing that arguments only made things worse. Meanwhile, Roman's mother, Lydia Nikolaevna, continued her daily calls. Each conversation came with the same pattern concern on the surface, but criticism underneath. She repeatedly suggested that Yelena was putting pressure on her son and should be more supportive. Over time, these remarks began to affect the situation at home. Yelena eventually pushed back during one call, explaining that she was also working hard and was tired of being blamed for everything. The reaction from her material was immediate and cold. She accused Yelena of becoming arrogant and ended the call abruptly that evening. Roman returned home already agitated. When he heard about the conversation between the two women, he sided with each matter without hesitation. He dismissed Yelena's feelings and told her she was being overly sensitive. This moment created a deep emotional divide between them. A week later, Roman managed to find new employment, but the salary was lower than before. This affected each's mood further. He became quieter, more withdrawn, and increasingly tense at home. 10 came a sudden turning point that changed everything. One day, Roman returned home earlier than usual. Yelena was in the kitchen preparing food when he entered. Without warning, a sudden act of aggression occurred, leaving her injured and shocked. Roman justified each's actions by saying it was meant as a lesson and claimed he feared losing control in the relationship dynamic. He referenced each's Mather's influence, suggesting he believed he was acting under guidance meant to prevent him from being dominated in the household. Yelena stood in disbelief. Instead of reacting with panic or shouting, she became unusually calm. After a moment of silence, she left the room and checked her condition, clearly shaken and injured. What followed was a turning point in her response. She took her phone and called Lydia Nikolaevna directly. In a controlled voice, she mentioned the incident and referred to advice that had allegedly influenced Roman's behavior. She stated that her husband had said that justification after the incident. Nikolaevna immediately denied any involvement, insisting she had never suggested anything of the sort. The conversation quickly became tense, with both sides refusing to accept responsibility. Yelena ended the call without further argument. Shortly after, loud knocking echoed through the apartment door. Lydia Nikolaevna had arrived in person, clearly alarmed and demanding answers. She insisted on seeing her son immediately. When the door was opened, she entered quickly and confronted Roman, who was still inside. Her reaction was immediate and intense as she demanded an explanation for what had happened. Roman tried to defend himself, insisting that each's actions were misunderstood and influenced by the pressure he felt at home. The situation escalated into a heated confrontation between mother and son, exposing deep misunderstandings and misplaced blame. The atmosphere in the apartment shifted completely, marking a critical breakdown in trust between all three of them. Lydia Nikolaevna tried to justify the situation, insisting that her words had been misunderstood. She claimed she only meant that Yelena should not be controlled in the relationship, not that any form of aggression was acceptable. Her explanation, however, only deepened the confusion and tension in the room. Yelena stood quietly in the doorway, watching everything unfold. Despite the chaos, her expression had changed. There was no panic, only a calm sense of final clarity. Lydia turned to her with a pleading tone, apologizing and trying to soften the situation, but Yelena no longer engaged emotionally. She simply acknowledged what had happened without argument. She walked into the hallway and began packing a small bag with her essential belongings. Lydia followed her, visibly distressed, asking if she was really planning to leave. Yelena confirmed that she was calm and appeared from the room, attempting to stop her. He apologized and asked her to reconsider, insisting he had acted impulsively and regretted everything, but Yelena remained firm. When he tried to justify each's actions as a moment of stress and misunderstanding, she cut him off calmly, making it clear that the issue was not the argument itself, but the fact that he had crossed a line. She left the apartment without further discussion. Outside, she called a taxi and switched off her phone as it began ringing repeatedly. That night, she stayed with a close friend who offered her comfort and space without questions. For the first time in a long while, Yelena slept peacefully. The following morning, Roman attempted to contact her again, asking to talk and apologizing repeatedly. He asked for another chance, promising change. But Yelena had already made her decision. She told him she would proceed with separation. Over the next days, he continued reaching out, trying to convince her to return, while each's mother also pleaded for reconciliation. Despite the emotional pressure, Yelena did not change her position. The legal process moved quickly, as there were few shared assets and no children involved. The separation was finalized without prolonged disputes. Roman remained in the apartment that had been registered in each's name before the marriage. Yelena collected her belongings and moved out permanently. She rented a small studio apartment on the outskirts of the city and returned to a simple, structured routine focused on work and personal stability. Over time, the emotional weight of the situation began to fade. One day, months later, a friend informed her that Lydia Nikolaevna had also experienced financial difficulties. Roman had moved back in with her, but struggled to keep employment and contributed little at home. The situation had reversed, placing strain on each matter instead, Elena listened without emotional reaction. When asked if she felt regret, she answered honestly that she did not. A year later, Elena met someone new at work. He was quiet, respectful, and emotionally steady. Their relationship developed gradually, without pressure or conflict. There were no demands, only consistency and mutual understanding. One evening, during a casual conversation, he asked about her past relationship. Elena replied briefly, saying there was nothing meaningful left to revisit. She described it as a difficult chapter that had ended for the right reasons. He did not press further. Later that winter, Елена у них подседлась у Лидии Николаевна at a bus stop. The woman looked older and worn down by time. They crossed paths silently. Without interruption, Elena continued to work that evening. She returned to her apartment, made tea, and sat by the window watching the snowfall. The room was quiet, warm, and calm. She reflected briefly on how her life had once been filled with tension and control, and how distant that now felt. There was no anger in her thoughts, only distance and acceptance. For the first time in a long while, she felt fully at ease.